welcome to our Pride Talk, the History of Pride. I'm Michelle Call and I'm the Executive Director of the Gala Pride and Diversity Center. I'm a white, cisgender, bisexual woman and I have two transgender teens that I'm a proud parent to.
Hi, my name is Doug Heumann and I'm the 2021 President of Gala, but I'm also a human being. I'd like to think of that first. He, him, his are my pronouns. A trans man, an advocate for LGBTQ rights, and I'm an attorney, among other things. The Pride and Diversity Center, yes, that's our new name now. The Pride and Diversity Center has a new mission as well. Our mission is that our center supports and empowers people of all sexual orientation, gender identities, and expressions to strengthen and unite our Central Coast community.
And, en español, el Centro de Orgullo y Diversidad Gala apoya y empodera a la gente de todas las orientaciones sexuales, identidades de género y expresiones de género para fortalecer y unir nuestra comunidad de la Costa Central.
So we'll start with post-World War II. You'll see the word homophiles, and homophile is probably a very archaic name, I should say. It was coined back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, and the phile portion is the Greek word for love, rather than focusing on the sexual aspect. The words gay, lesbian, and bisexual came into favor in that same time frame during the gay liberation movement. We know that LGBTQ plus persons have existed throughout recorded history. But our modern history of our movement really began, like I said, around World War II, when servicemen and women went into the service and they got away from the Ohio farms, etc., no disparagement of Ohio, but they found people like them with same-sex attraction, and they liked that they had somebody that they were, and they could find they were no longer alone. After demobilization, the gay community became much more apparent as port cities like San Francisco and New York experienced this influx of the gay military people. The Mattachine Society was formed by Harry Hay in 1951, tried to normalize gay and lesbian experiences. By dressing conservatively and working for civil rights alongside people of color and other minorities, Mattachines hoped to make change quietly. In 1955, Del Martin and Phyllis Lyons founded the Daughters of Bilitis. It was a secret group for lesbians. You may know these two names, Martin and Lyon, because they were the first same-sex couple to be married legally by Governor Gavin Newsom some 52 years after they got together and started this lesbian group. Homophile organizations have continued to do their fairly quiet work until Stonewall.
So, a full decade before the Stonewall actions that led to the first Pride, there were many different incidents and actions. For instance, there were police roundups, the checking of IDs, and if your gender presentation didn't match the ID, people were taken to jail. Doug, could you tell us a little bit more about what it was like to be an LGBTQ plus individual at that time?
Well, what I remember is a lot of fear and a lot of shame. I began to go to the bars in St. Louis and East St. Louis in the early 70s. And we're in the seediest of neighborhoods. There were separate gay and lesbian bars. You didn't go into one or the other unless you had a special knock, a password, or possibly the bouncer knew you or you went with somebody that the bouncer knew and they could introduce you. That was how you got entered. If you were a male patron, you had to be accompanied by a lesbian to a woman's bar and vice versa.
And what Doug is talking about was definitely borne out in the actions that happened before Stonewall.
So leading up to the Stonewall riots, there were skirmishes with the police, and one of them was in 1960, was at Gene Compton's cafeteria, which is in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. Compton's was one of the few places where hustlers, street kids, transgender sex workers could all go late at night. But employees frequently called the police, who would then harass these customers and arrest the transgender women for impersonating a female. When an officer mistreated a trans woman yet again during a raid in 1966, she threw coffee in his face and the scene erupted into a chaos. More than 60 people in the crowd began throwing dishes and furniture at the police. After windows were smashed, a police car was destroyed, and dozens of people thrown into paddy wagons. That was just the beginning. The next night, picket was held outside Compton's again because Compton's was refusing to let those same transgender clients come back in. The newly installed plate glass windows were smashed again. The city met with the protesters, and in 1968, the National Transsexual Counseling Unit was established. It was overseen by San Francisco Police Department Sergeant Elliot Blackstone, the first police officer in America to serve as a liaison to the homophile community.
So what was the Stonewall Inn? Have you heard of the Genovese crime family? The mob in New York? Well, they owned the Stonewall Inn, a dive bar at 53 Christopher Street in Greenwich Village. We call it a bar, but it didn't even have a liquor license. Fire exits were non-existent, and running water was not on tap. There were so few glasses that a patron needed to finish their drink so the next person could have a drink. And yet the Stonewall Inn was a venue that offered freedom. It had music and dancing, and it was one of the only places that New York's LGBTQ plus community could socialize and truly be themselves. The mob became the financial backer of New York's underground gay scene, and they funded several establishments and kept the cops away with bribes.
So, Michelle, that experience wasn't just limited to New York. Mob families were the reason that I never experienced a raid by the police in the St. Louis or East St. Louis bar. But I did learn about the mobs, interestingly enough. I was a frequenter of what was called Phyllis's Kitchen. It was a lesbian bar in East St. Louis. And I saw a woman who had come in and was drinking at the bar, and I thought she was kind of cute, so I was going to go ask her to dance. And my friend strongly sat me down and cautioned me, as I didn't know who she was. And it turns out she was the sister of the mob boss that protected PK. So as you can imagine, I never made a move on that woman. Walk silently away.
Yes. So at 1:20 a.m. on June 28, 1969, the police poured into the Stonewall Inn, and nobody was prepared for it. The raid caught the Stonewall staff entirely off guard. There was no time to hide the liquor or give any warnings. It was the club's worst nightmare. And of course, everyone just expected the mob's protection, but this was election time, and Mayor John Lindsay was running for a second term in November, and he wanted to show his electorate that he was tough on crime. So being LGBT was definitely a crime. The patrons were told to line up against the wall and be ready to produce their identification. Those whose gender didn't appear to match their driver's license were arrested, and those people who didn't have identification were taken into the next room to have their sex verified. Of course, this raid was very scary. The Stonewall Inn had been a sanctuary, especially for drag queens and transsexuals. We now say transgender people, persons who were not often welcomed even at other gay bars. So that morning, the Stonewall was actually full of people who had every reason not to want to show their ID.
Not showing ID, you can think of all sorts of reasons, like if they showed their ID and they said who they really were. Of course, this was going to go out in the newspapers, and their employers were going to be noticed. One of the things that the police were looking for were 3 articles of clothing that you were expected to be wearing that should match your sex assigned at birth. Of course, that's new verbiage for us. But when you talk about having to indicate and show someone what your gender was or what your sex was, we all think that sounds really archaic, but if you realize, if you're reading the news, our transgender athletes are being asked to do this right now so that they can just participate even in high school or university sports. So it may not be all that far afield. So obviously the Stonewall patrons resisted. They weren't going to cooperate with law enforcement, and I'd say that's an understatement because they keep going. The riots kept on coming.
Yes, so when they were told that everybody would be taken to the police station, Marsha P Johnson, a black drag queen who would later transition, proclaimed her rights by throwing a shot glass into the mirror. It is often said that Marsha P Johnson threw the first brick at Stonewall, but that's actually disputed. So a crowd gathered outside the inn, including those who'd escaped from inside, and friends who heard the news and came to support everybody. A rumor that cops were beating the patrons inside led the crowd to taunt police officers as people were brought out in handcuffs. Stormé DeLarverie, known as the Rosa Parks of the gay community, fought with police officers and received a clubbing. As she was thrown into the back of a patrol wagon, she turned to the crowd and shouted, "Hey, why don't you guys do something?" Well, you guys certainly could and did do something. They outnumbered law enforcement by a lot. They threw pennies, beer bottles, cans, and cobblestones at police. Tires were slashed, and as protesters fell to the ground, more came forward to take their place. They even pulled parking meters up from the pavement and used them as battering rams. So in the chaos, detainees began to escape and join the fight, and the police retreated into the bar, which patrons immediately set on fire. By 4 o'clock that morning, the Stonewall Inn was in ruins and the streets were quiet. Both police and rioters had been hospitalized, and the violence, it seemed, was over. But things were really only just beginning. Now that the dam was broken, people turned out again the following night, and the night after that, taking to the streets over and over again. What had once been secret was now out, and there was no shoving it back in the closet. The Stonewall Inn was open to greet them.
Stonewall Inn riots, those could have actually come and gone, like, say, Compton's Cafeteria and some other things that happened in LA previously. So it could have been a one-off, but our community wasn't satisfied with that. So Christopher Street Liberation Day was held on the first anniversary of the riots. It was held in New York, and folks marched from Greenwich Village to Central Park. The tone was very somber, but the thrill of holding hands and just being publicly out was just really deeply felt. Now, the left coast, Christopher Street West, people marched in Los Angeles in June of 1969, around the same time, but it was very different. So this was held in Hollywood, so of course there were floats and costumes and artists and performers, social workers. So these were our first Pride events. So the next slide will show you that we have a flag. And this came out originally in the 70s, right after Stonewall. It was designed in San Francisco by an artist named Gilbert Baker. It had 8 multicolored stripes. And the demand for the flag rose after openly gay San Francisco City Supervisor Harvey Milk had been assassinated in 1978. The original flag was 8 different colors, each with its own meaning: hot pink for sex, red for life, green for nature, and so forth. But because it was cheaper to produce these with fewer colors, the later editions of the flag were created with 6 colors, lacking the hot pink and the turquoise. Of course, as we know, over time, many other flags have been produced for Pride and to represent the other identities of LGBT plus persons, black, brown, etc. So the Christopher Street West and East celebrations continued annually. And our community grew and matured to where they finally decided to flex their advocacy muscles. So 10 years after the Stonewall riots was the first National March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights. Harvey Milk had been an organizer, but as you might remember, in '78 he did pass away. It was held on October 14, 1979, and was attended by between 75,000 and approximately 125,000 folks. The organizers urged equal rights and advocated for the passage of protective civil rights legislation for LGBT persons. Audre Lorde, a feminist, lesbian, poet, and civil rights activist, was just one of the many speakers at the National March. In her speech, she said, "We are saying to the world that the struggles of lesbians and gay men is a real and particular and inseparable part of the struggle of all oppressed people within this country."
And then the second National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights took place in Washington, D.C. on October 11th, 1987. October 11th is now celebrated as National Coming Out Day. Also called the Great March, it was bigger in size and scope than the first march. And ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, was formed in 1987 to bring needed awareness to the Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, or AIDS crisis. ACT UP made use of civil disobedience and activism to combat the misperception that gay people had somehow caused this disease. They were known for their theatrical demonstrations, and they demanded better research, medications, and education.
Locally, in San Luis Obispo County in 1984, the founders of the AIDS Support Network, now called the Access support network with the addition of services to Monterey County, ASN witnessed an urgent need in our community to provide advocacy and support for people living with HIV/AIDS. Since that time, ASN has grown and adapted to the unique needs of that community. According to Dana Belmonte, the Gala Pride Diversity Center's first board president, after the 1987 March on Washington, the SLO Lambda Center was organized with much enthusiasm, but after just a year it failed. In 1989, David Perez and Dana Belmonte used the Lambda Center's mailing list and started the current Gala, which was then incorporated as the Gay and Lesbian Alliance of the Central Coast.
So that was some great background. What can you tell us about the first Pride here in San Luis Obispo, Doug?
Well, that was an exciting time. In 1996, the Gala board began to plan the first Pride Week and Festival. It went from July 6th to the 13th, and it started with the Sunday family picnic at Biddle Park. We had an interfaith potluck, movie at the Palm, big Pride party at the only gay and lesbian bisexual bar in town called Breezes, and then the big Pride Festival. The first Pride Festival was held in Mission Plaza, so there was a lot of discussion in the board about how out we really wanted to be, because this is the first time this is happening. There was a lot of fear. So people were talking about, well, maybe just do it in Biddle Park. Which I'm like, well, no, that's way out there. Nobody will go to that except us. And the idea was to educate the community. So somebody said Mitchell Park, and I said, no, where do all the big groups go? Where is the most attraction? Where are the most people going to see us? And it was in Mission Plaza. So that was what the decision was, to go to Mission Plaza.
And so what did it feel like going there on the day? Were you concerned or?
Oh, concerned. That's a small word, actually. I was really, really worried. I remember it was about 11:30. Things were supposed to kick off about noon. I remember the exact bench I was sitting on. And I was just so worried. And I remember Ellen coming over. Ellen Sturtz was one of the amazing volunteers, along with Robin and so many more. And I was just telling her about how I felt. Did I make the right decision trying to push the board to do this? And was I inviting, some violence against our community? I was just questioning everything. And then I thought, well, if not, will anybody show up? Will everybody be afraid? Will they come and enjoy themselves? And it turned out wonderfully. So much good things came out of it. We had so much security in place, which we didn't need, thank God. There were pastors that we had, one each hour for the 6 hours that the plaza would be open, to address any religious fanatics who were going to come out and be against us, and to talk to the media if that was necessary. So it was just great. Everybody had a great time. It was wonderful, wonderful elation.
So from 1998 to 2019, Pride continued, celebrating in the plaza, bringing headlines to the Performing Arts Center at Cal Poly. Tommy Rose was an institution at the Friday night drag show. Doug, can you tell us a couple of your best memories of those years of Pride?
Sure. The one I remember most vividly is the very first Pride, and the whole board was up on stage, and we were kicking it off. And I remember the last words I said, "We're here and we're queer," and I screamed it into the microphone, and I was like, wow, it was freeing. Other things that I remember is, that we had something for everybody every year. You'd have something for families like the bounce house. We had the quieter things in the little venue where we'd have Mother Tongue, Jill Knight, some of the acoustic groups. And as a matter of fact, not only was she there the first time, she's going to be there this time too. So tune in for Jill.
It's not a Pride without Jill Knight.
That's right. But what the biggest thing is, I may not see certain people. You may have played softball with them years ago. You may have done this and that. You may have interacted with them at different things through Gala. But maybe some over time you don't have this consistent contact. But every year you see almost the same people, and you get to reconnect, and it's such a feeling of family, and so it just gives me so much energy. There's a lot of energy to put on something like that, but you get a lot of energy back because you're just seeing people, and people are so happy to be out and enjoying themselves and just feeling good about being who they are.
Community connection is a really important piece of Pride for me as well. I know that just coming to see people that I haven't seen all year, to be together, to be in a group of people where it's okay to be your authentic self all the time is just an amazing experience and incredibly affirming. I remember seeing RuPaul years and years ago. I remember seeing Belinda Carlisle. And, you know, we have had great acts and great things happening every year, but you're right, it's the community connection. It's the being together. That's the best part.
And you know, there's always somebody new at a booth that you would think, like the Mormons, right? A group that you would never expect to see, and they're there to support us. And so that's always that's an education for me too as well.
Yes.
Who's in our corner.
And the great vendor booths. In the year that Central Coast Kink came and baked 600 cookies and gave them out with the tagline, "Come to the dark side, we have cookies."
How did I miss that? I love cookies.
In 2020, we celebrated Pride in a socially distanced way. We set up tables for folks to pick up pre-ordered t-shirts, we took photos on our newly painted rainbow steps, and we gave away flags and other goodies. We also participated in a global live-streamed Pride event that went for 24 hours and was really amazing to watch, hearing highlights and struggles from other countries as well as from the United States. We were really sad to not be together in community with everybody in person, but we really appreciated the chance to come together, at least online and virtually. So that brings us to Pride 2021, and we can't wait to share with you all the events that we have lined up for this year's Pride. Whether it's our drag show emceed by Juicy CW, the Saturday night concert featuring Jill Knight and band, our virtual lounges, our car caravan, we can't wait to see you at all these different things. Check out everything at www.slopride.com, and all of our events are free apart from the drag show and the concert, and everything is family friendly apart from our Friday night 18+ events. We really hope you enjoyed hearing about the history of Pride, both nationally and locally, and we look forward to celebrating with you.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
3.
Happy Pride!